All right. I want you to think about every single every single person in the world that has thought about playing in the NFL. Now I want you to think about how many people have actually made it to the NFL. Like, out of all those people that have they've made it to the NFL. Think about all the players, like I'm saying, throughout all of history that have played in the NFL that have made it into the record books, the stat books. What if I told you that the NFL record holder for the most career passing yards, the most career pass completions, the most career touchdown passes, the highest career completion percentage, most career touchdown passes, and highest career completion percentage, highest single season completion percentage, most consecutive games with a touchdown pass, most pass completions in a season, most 5,000 yard seasons, highest completion percentage in a game, and most touchdown passes in a game is the same person. I mean, at that point, you can't just call them elite. That's just an insult at this point. Drew Brees is definitely, when it comes down to he's what I call a longevity GOAT. The fact that he's been elite for so long, that's his argument. He's a GOAT in that sense. He's been an elite level quarterback for as long as I can remember. I mean, he was playing college football quarterback. He was playing college football as a college football quarterback before I was born. That's how old Drew Brees is, and that's how amazing Drew Brees is. The fact that he's been able to dominate and play in the NFL. He's been in the NFL since 2001. Do you understand that? Like, there are about to be NBA players drafted in this upcoming draft that weren't born in 2001. Like, do you guys, that is ridiculous. Like, his entire NFL career is a college student. And I'll get into that in a bit. So right now it is Monday, July 20th, 2020 out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I was going to do a GOAT profile on one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. I have no idea when he's going to stop playing, so considering he's going to play this upcoming year, he says he is, I'm going to make this profile because if he comes back, when he comes back this year, he'll still be an elite quarterback, and as long as he's playing for the New Orleans Saints are always a threat, of course. But to give you I'll give you a little background, Drew Brees is a 41-year-old quarterback who plays for the New Orleans Saints right now. He was under some heat for the flag comment, but he's known throughout the NFL community as like a Walter Payton Man of the Year. He's done so much for the city of New Orleans as the quarterback, especially after Katrina hit. We all know Drew's the guy, but like, hopefully he understands what he said was wrong. But that still doesn't take away from the fact that he's one of the greatest football players that ever played, especially during my lifetime. I love watching Drew Brees, and I'm a Falcons fan. He stands at 6 feet tall. I would say he's the most accurate passer I've ever seen, or if not the most accurate passer, he throws the most accurate. He throws the most catchable ball in the NFL because there's a reason he leads the league in completion percentage, in completions, in yards every season. I mean, a lot of it could be coach call, but he's still the quarterback that can make all those throws. So, like I'm saying, Drew Brees, originally from Dallas, Texas. He was recruited to go play up in college at Purdue. And I mean, Drew Brees was so good in Purdue that they named the Big 12 or the Big 10 Player of the Year after Drew Brees. That's how good he was. For his freshman year, he didn't play. In 1998, he would be the starting sophomore quarterback as he would complete 63% of his passes for 3,983 yards. He would throw for 39 touchdowns and 20 interceptions for a Purdue team that would finish 9-4, and they would beat the Kansas State Wildcats in the Alamo Bowl that year. Drew Brees would go on to he'd be known as one of the best young quarterbacks in football. He'd be named the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year as a sophomore. A feat he wouldn't get until his senior year, because his junior year, he would go and throw for 3,900 yards with 25 touchdowns, 12 interceptions in 1999, where they ended up losing in the Outback Bowl to Georgia after finishing 7-5 on the season. And finally, in Drew Brees' final season at Purdue as a senior, he completed 60.4% of his passes for 3,668 yards for 26 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Once again, he would help Purdue get to the bowl game. He would get with Joe Tiller. He would lead them to the Rose Bowl where they eventually lost. And at that point, Drew Brees was already on the national stage. He was recognized. And like I'm saying, he was so good at Purdue that they named the award after him. He was named the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year yet again. And I guess he had made a good enough impression to get taken with the 32nd overall pick by the San Diego Chargers. And the San Diego Chargers decided they were going to try to build their franchise around Drew Brees to really start off. Drew Brees' first season was 2001. Like he played one game in it. He didn't play that year, but this first season was 2001. That is incredibly ridiculous when you think about it like that. But the San Diego Chargers would make the playoffs until 2004. And that was when he came back from his big injury. And that was the year that the San Diego Chargers had to really contemplate whether they were going to keep Drew Brees or decide to draft another quarterback. But of course, Drew Brees would put up a Pro Bowl season where in 15 games he would start, put up an 11-4 record, and a year that the San Diego Chargers would win the AFC West with a 12-4 record. He would end up completing 65.5% of his passes while throwing for 3,159 yards for 27 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, all while getting the Chargers to the wild card where they lost to the Jets in overtime. But Drew Brees was named the comeback player of the year for, of course, being a Pro Bowler, coming back from the injury that he came back from. And that would kind of follow into 2005. Following his first Pro Bowl, his age 26 season, he would start 16 games. It would go 9-7 in his final season in San Diego. And that year, the San Diego Chargers would end up missing the playoffs. But that was the year that Sean Merriman was the Defensive Rookie of the Year. The year before, LT really went off before Phillip Rivers got there. But you had Phillip Rivers sitting under Drew Brees because they were unsure of whether they were going to keep Drew Brees after that season. But of course, that season, he still completed 65% of his passes, throwing for 3,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. And Drew Brees really going through it. But once he went to New Orleans, that's kind of when his career clicked because that was his career. That was his legacy before he went to New Orleans. Through his first 5 years in the league, it took him until his second year to start. He had made one Pro Bowl, and in his second year, he threw a lot of interceptions, and he had to deal with an injury, and he knew that San Diego didn't believe in him, especially at that point. So following that, he would start his stint in New Orleans, especially following Hurricane Katrina and all, but 2006 was the year that he became the franchise quarterback at New Orleans, and he became that leader. And he did all he did for New Orleans, and of course, people will never forget that. 2006, he would lead the Saints to a 10-6 record. He would be the Walter Payton Man of the Year while being a Pro Bowler for the second time in his career and being named a first-team All-Pro quarterback while completing 64.3% of his passes. He led the league in passing yards with 4,418, the first time he had ever done so in his career. He threw for 26 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and he led the league in yards per game. And that season, the New Orleans Saints would go on and they would win the NFC South for the very first time, at least while Drew Brees was there. That was the first time that they made the playoffs. It was his first year there. They would go on to beat the Eagles in the division round of the playoffs before they lost to the Bears 39-14 before the Bears went to the Super Bowl and lost to Peyton Manning. But Drew Brees was the Walter Payton Man of the Year, and Sean Payton was the Coach of the Year for Drew Brees throwing all those yards. I mean, that was an insane season. The Saints would miss the playoffs the next two seasons in 2008, 2009, but Drew Brees was still a man amongst boys in those years. In 2007, Drew Brees would start all 16 games as he finished 7-9 as a starting quarterback, completing 67% of his passes, his career high at that point. He would go on to throw for 4,423 yards, which at that point was a new career high in yards. He would throw for 28 touchdowns, another career high, and 18 interceptions, another career high, which is why he wasn't named a Pro Bowler that year. for the. I mean, after. I mean, that was 4 years from being named a Pro Bowler for the first time after his age 28 season. That was before his streak really started. But even up until then, Drew Brees he was a quarterback that had proven that he had proven himself with the New Orleans Saints, that he knew that this is his new franchise, and now that he was in New Orleans, he was going to take that franchise for a joyride. Going into 2008, they would finish with a 8-8 record. They finished fourth in the NFC South in a wild year. But Drew Brees would win Offensive Player of the Year that year, as he finished leading the league in passing yards that year, as he started all 16 games for the Saints. He finished with 5,069 yards in the season on 65% completion percentage. That was the first season in which Drew Brees had thrown for 5,000 yards. That had been the second time in which he led the league in yards in 2008. That was the first time he led the league in touchdown passes. He also threw 17 interceptions. He led the league in yards per game for the second time in his career. And that year, they missed the playoffs, but oh man, Drew Brees was ready. And 2009 might go down as Drew Brees' best year probably ever. And this is why I would consider Drew Brees GOATed. So he would go on to start 15 games. He would have a 13-2 record in those 15 games. And in those games, he would lead the league in completion percentage. He completed 70.6% of his passes, which up until then is the first time he'd ever completed 70% of his passes. On 514 passes, he completed 70.6% of them. He led the league in completion percentage, throwing over 500 attempts. He finished with 4,388 yards on the season. He led the league in touchdown passes for the second time with 34. He led the league in touchdown percentage for the only time in his career. He would go on to lead the league in passer rating. The Saints would go on to the playoffs in 2009 after finishing 13-3 in the NFC South. They would go on to beat the Cardinals 45-14. They would beat the Vikings in overtime 31-28. And they would beat the Colts in Super Bowl 44. And Drew Brees would be the Super Bowl MVP. That's the one time the Saints have ever won the championship. The city of New Orleans has never won a championship until Drew Brees came into town after Katrina, took us to the playoffs, suffered for a bit, came back, and then took us straight to the Super Bowl. The city of New Orleans most definitely needed that. Drew Brees was the Super Bowl MVP, and this was coming off a season where he was the Offensive Player of the Year. So the NFL was starting to recognize Drew Brees as that guy. And so by the time Drew Brees was a champion, that was the end of his age 30 season. By the end of his 20s, he was already a 4-time Pro Bowler. He was named a first-team All-Pro quarterback once. He led the league in completions twice. He led the league in pass and completion percentage once, and he threw for 70% and completed 70% of his passes. He threw over 5,000 yards once. He threw for 34 touchdowns twice, and he led his team to the Super Bowl, especially that city being New Orleans, the city that actually embraced him instead of San Diego that sent him away for Phillip Rivers. That leads into 2010, and in his 2010 season in New Orleans, the New Orleans Saints would finish with an 11-5 record, and they finished second in the NFC South. Drew Brees would be a Pro Bowler for the third straight year, but for the fifth time in total. He would lead the league in completion percentage for the second time in a row, completing 68.1% of his passes, throwing for 4,620 yards, 33 touchdowns, 22 interceptions, the most interceptions Drew Brees had up to that date. But hey, I mean, he still made the playoffs that year. The Saints would go on, and they would lose to the Seahawks in the wild card in 2010. But I mean, Drew Brees had still done everything he really needed to do. And after that, in 2011, Drew Brees would be the Offensive Player of the Year, and as he led the Saints to a 13-3 season in which he led the league in completion with 468, and he led the league in completion percentage with 71.2. That was the first time he led the league in completions and completion percentage. He does that again, but he would go on to lead the league in passing yards with 5,476, which I'm pretty sure is a record that still stands for passing yards in a season, unless Peyton Manning already passed it. He threw for 46 touchdowns that season, leading the league. He led the league in yards per game at 342.3. So basically, after winning the Super Bowl, a couple of years after, he puts together the greatest statistical season in New Orleans Saints history. And I mean, what else can you ask for Drew Brees here? And yeah, I mean, he was named the Offensive Player of the Year. They did beat the Lions in the wild card, and they lost the divisional round to the 49ers, 36-32. But yeah, Drew Brees is officially that guy. And especially with that season to me, that's what made him GOATed. Like, because he was already the Super Bowl MVP. He was the Offensive Player of the Year twice. But he still put up 5,400 yards while leading the league in completions and completion percentage. That's quite a flex for a quarterback that not many quarterbacks get to say. I think that season is what GOATed Drew Brees for me. But even after that, like, everything that he did was just adding to his legacy. He had nothing left to prove after that. In 2012, the Saints would miss the playoffs with a 7-9 record. But Drew Brees would still end up completing 63% of his passes for 5,177 yards. This would be the fourth time Drew Brees would lead the league in passing yards. This would be the third time in a 5-year span that he has thrown for 5,000 yards. He would lead the league in touchdowns with 43. This would be the second time he's thrown for 40 touchdowns in a season. He would lead the league in interceptions, the only time he would lead the league in interceptions in his entire career. He'd lead the league in yards per game for the fourth season, of course, because it goes with yards, and he played 16 games each season. But that season, the Saints, they would miss the playoffs, but Drew Brees still put together a statistically amazing season, and it wasn't the offense's fault that the Saints were making the playoffs that year. Transition to 2013. He would start all 16 games in his age 34 season to lead the Saints into an 11-5 season where they would eventually finish second in the NFC South, where they would finish in the wild card. But that season, Drew Brees would make yet again another Pro Bowl as he finished completing 69% of his passes for 5,162 yards. He didn't lead the league in passing this season, but that was the fourth time he threw for 5,000 yards. Like, that's 4 5,000 yard seasons, like, nonchalantly. Quarterbacks don't throw for 5,000 yards. He had 39 touchdowns, 12 interceptions on the season. That season, the New Orleans Saints would end up beating the Eagles in the wild card, but losing to the Seahawks in the division round when the Seahawks were really, really good. For the next 3 years, the Saints would miss the playoffs, but in 2014 through 2014, Drew Brees would make the Pro Bowl in 2014 and 2016. He would lead the league in passing yards in all 3 of those years. He missed the playoffs, and in 2014, he threw for 4,952 yards with 33 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. In 2015, he threw for 4,870 yards with 32 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. And in his age 37 season, in 2016, he threw for 5,208 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 15 interceptions. I mean, at that point, Drew Brees at 37 was throwing for 5,000 yards. And that was the 5th time he did so. And and he hasn't thrown 5,000 yards in his season to date. And that would also be the last time he's led the league in passing yards. That's the 7th time he's done it, throwing for 30. I mean, and he threw for 37 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. I mean, incredible season. The Saints would eventually make the playoffs in 2017. Of course, as Michael Thomas started to grow into this offense and Alvin Kamara got involved and Marshawn Lattimore started to add to their defense, they got a lot better, and they would finish with an 11-5 record in 2017. His age 38 season, by the way. Drew Brees would make yet another Pro Bowl, his 11th as a quarterback, which I might say, to be a Pro Bowler at the NFC, I mean, you have to be the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks like every year to be named, and Drew Brees is consistently named. But just saying, he's led the league in completion percentage for the 4th time in his career. He completed 72% of his passes, throwing for 4,334 yards, 23 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, leading the league in yards per attempt for the only time in his career. In that season, the Saints would go on to beat the Panthers in the wild card, and they lost to the Vikings off of the Stephon Diggs play, off of some, yeah, off. I mean, that was off of some bad luck in the playoffs for the Saints, especially in the last couple of seasons. Then it would go to 2018, where Drew Brees would put up another Pro Bowl season, where the Saints would go 13-2. The best record he's put together in New Orleans since 2011. One of the best seasons he's had in New Orleans. He would go on to complete 74.4% of his passes, the highest completion percentage he's ever had in a season at age 39. In 15 games, he threw for 3,992 yards, 32 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He would lead the league in passer rating for the second time in his career. He'd lead the league in QBR for the second time in his career. And in 2018, the New Orleans Saints would end up being the first seed in the NFC South. They would eventually beat the Eagles 20-14 in the divisional round, and they'd lose to the Rams in overtime. And I guess the Saints are mad about some calls, here or there. But that's Drew Brees' legacy. And I'll finish it off by introducing this most recent season. Drew Brees only started 11 games this year. He went 8-3. I mean, he didn't start off the season, but he came in eventually. He led the league in completion percentage for the 6th time in his 19-year career. He led the league in completion percentage. At 74% of his passes. He threw for 2,979 yards. He completed 27 touchdowns, and he threw for 4 interceptions on the entire season. In 2019, the Saints ended up with a 13-3 record in the NFC South, but they eventually lost in the wild card to the Vikings, and Michael Thomas was the Offensive Player of the Year, as Michael Thomas has set an NFL record for completions. And I mean, a lot of that credit goes to the quarterback for throwing to him, in addition to Michael Thomas getting open all those times. So right now, as I sit back and look at Drew Brees' career is so ridiculous, and we completely overlook it every single day. I mean, if we're looking at his past, in his 5-year stint in San Diego, he only played 4 of them. And in the 4 years he was a starter there, he built himself up to being a Pro Bowl level player who could at least throw for a good amount of yards in a season. And he even worked himself up to being the comeback player of the year after the injury, but San Diego decided he wasn't the quarterback for them. And Drew Brees went to New Orleans, a struggling football program, especially after Katrina, brought their team back to life, took them to the playoffs. Put together 2 Offensive Player of the Year seasons, and sandwiched in between them was a year in which he put together one of the league's best completion percentages and led the team to win the Super Bowl after being a quarterback that's thrown for 5,000 yards in a season. He goes on to throw for almost 5,500 yards in a season, more than any quarterback has thrown in a season, I assume, until Peyton Manning. And with everything else going on, I mean, there's nothing else you can add to his legacy at this point. He's led the league in passing yards 7 times. He's led the league in passing touchdowns 4 times. He's led the league in passing percentage 6 times. I mean, these are Hall of Fame MVP numbers. I mean, at this point, there's no way you can't consider him a GOAT. Even though he hasn't won an MVP, the stats speak for themselves. The longevity speaks for itself. And the Super Bowl that he won for his city, it speaks for itself. To me, Drew Brees is GOATed in that city. I think he'll go down as the greatest New Orleans Saint to ever play. And to add to the fact that he was a Walter Payton Man of the Year award. And he still holds the NFL record for the most career passing yards, the most career pass completions, the most career touchdown passes, the highest career completion percentage, the highest single season completion percentage, the most consecutive games with a touchdown pass, the most pass completions in a season, the most 5,000 yard seasons, the highest completion percentage in a game, and most touchdown passes in a game. And this guy just came off of a Pro Bowl season. So yes, I assume he's going to be very elite this season. I don't know when he's going to stop. I'm just going to keep watching this dude because I'm really going to miss Drew Brees when he's gone. Drew Brees is an amazing quarterback. You should watch what he says. But Drew Brees is already a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's definitely one of the best quarterbacks that I've ever seen. And with that, I've said what I've said. I've said my piece. Drew Brees is a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback that I will be expecting to wear a gold jacket when 4 years after he retires, 4 or 5 years after he retires, because he's earned it. Even up until now, I like it. But that day hasn't come, and he's still an elite quarterback, and he still has an elite wide receiver, Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara in his offense. The Saints can still run. They're still the best built roster in the NFC South, and they could still compete for a championship. Drew Brees can compete for another championship. I mean, this time he'd probably compete for it in another decade, but that'd be insane. I want to see Drew Brees win a championship in 2009 and 2020. In 2021. I really want to see it. But with that said, I really appreciate everyone for listening to all 26 minutes of this. But if you get a chance, watch my boy Drew Brees. He currently wears number 9 for the Saints. And when you watch him play, just ask, like, how many 40-year-olds can make that pass? Really? Like, how many 40-year-olds can do what Drew Brees can do right now? How many professional quarterbacks in the primes of their lives can do what Drew Brees is doing right now? And even that answer is probably, like, you can probably count it on one, maybe 2 hands. And Drew Brees is 41 years old, significantly past his prime. And Drew Brees is still an elite young quarterback. He's still an elite young quarterback because he's playing like such. He's playing better than a lot of the young quarterbacks. With that said, I've said my piece. Thanks for hearing me out. Peace out.